Please welcome the director of Blackfish, Gabriela Cowperthwaite. Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Gabriela, welcome. Now, for the
Thanks
people.
for having me.
Oh, indeed. Well, we've obviously seen the trailer, but can you put into context for people what is Blackfish?
Blackfish is the name that the First Nations peoples, the Native Americans, the Pacific Northwest, used to call them. Old-time fishermen used to call them that as well. So,
Okay.
yeah, they were never meant to be. It's sort of the lore behind that name is that they were never meant to be captured, and they were never meant to be harmed.
Okay. Was that always a title when you embarked upon this project, or did it come
I
up?
started reading a book called A Whale Called Killer, and it featured some, old, timey kind of fisherman types, and they said, "Hey, we see a pot of blackfish in the distance," and at that moment, I was like, "That's my title."
Fair enough. And how did you find the story for this? What was your inspiration to make this documentary?
It's hard to say that this is inspiration because it feels sort of terrible to say that, but it was the death of Don Brancho was kind of confounded me, terrified me, and it just, I think, sort of gave me the gigantic question that I sort of had to answer, and that is, why did a top SeaWorld trainer come to be killed by a killer whale?
But still, when you have that question in your head, to actually go ahead and then start making a documentary, how difficult was that? Because you have to draw upon a lot of materials. There's a lot of archive footage in the film, which is often horrifying. How did you go about doing that? Was it a bit of detective work on your part, finding these hidden tapes and talking to people?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to stumble upon an article called Killer in the Pool by Tim Zimmerman. He wrote for Outside Magazine.
Yes.
That was just, to me, a pretty incredible, it had information in there that I had never, I didn't know existed. I didn't know that they were captured, where they were captured from. I sort of didn't know how whales got into these marine parks in the first place. So I think from that moment, I sort of had, I contacted him, spoke to him a bit, and we started kind of going, I started contacting some of his resources from that, and sort of, I think the moment that I knew it could be a film was when I sort of found out that there were former SeaWorld trainers who were willing to talk. That's when I knew I had a film, because I knew I needed apostles, is what I call them.
Yes.
Messengers from the other side.
Indeed.
To be able to sort of deliver the message.
Okay.
Right.
And we actually have a clip. We have a few clips from the film, and the first one actually features a few of those ex-trainers. Let's take a look at the clip. It's a fascinating clip because you talked about apostles, and the film comes down, I'd say, fairly strongly on the side of anti-captivity. And but at the same time, that gentleman there, the last ex-trainer, believes that killer whales should or can be kept in captivity with relatively little consequences if they're treated correctly. Was it important for you to have balance as well in the people you spoke to for this?
Yeah, I think with that clip in particular, I thought I knew I had to start the movie from this sort of bright-eyed vision and notion of SeaWorld that we all have growing up as kids, and the lovable, Shamu icon.
Yeah.
And this also kind of burning desire. I don't come from any animal activism.
Yes.
I'm sort of a mother who took her kids to SeaWorld. I'm a documentary filmmaker, but I took my kids to SeaWorld in San Diego. And so I needed to start the film there with the idea that SeaWorld is this, on every parent's bucket list of, where you take your kids. And,
Yeah.
and there's a reason for that, And so I kind of wanted to start up here with the dream that the trainers had, because for a lot of them it was a lifelong dream to sort of train killer whales. And that from that moment, I kind of wanted them to follow their trajectory for the storyline. So I had to start at the top, and start with the dream. And start with some of the sort of maybe more positive, positive sort of lives that they envisioned having.
Yeah.
When they started working there. And then, I guess, sort of peel back the onion from that moment on.
And did you, in terms of your research, did you actually, at any point, have first-hand experience of killer whales? I mean, there are scenes of them in the wild, there are scenes of them in captivity at SeaWorld and other places. Did you actually go and experience it yourself?
I did go to SeaWorld, and we filmed a bit there, and then and I saw them in the wild. So I saw both. Yeah. You know, and having been to SeaWorld before, I obviously had that experience. But yeah, from quite a different lens after embarking on working on the film.
I can imagine. What's that experience like when you see them up close, especially in the wild?
Oh my gosh, they are they're enormous. It's very wild. So in nature, they kind of ignore you. They're sort of just living their lives, and so you see these gigantic, dorsals swing by, but they're not that, curious or really that interested. I mean, that was like my experience. And then in SeaWorld, they're surface resting. So they're, I think it's called logging. They just sort of rest on the surface. That's not typical natural killer whale behavior. Yeah. So, and then they come up to the glass and then, may sort of consider you or look at you. I mean, you are the only stimulus that they have, really, is people and trainers. So it is interesting because that's not their typical behavior to sort of stare at you. Yeah. So anyway, it's almost like seeing two different animals. Okay. Yeah, and a lot of people describe killer whales at SeaWorld or marine parks as being kind of facsimiles of the real thing. Yeah. You're not really getting a killer whale necessarily. Okay.
I imagine a lot of people, like myself, have come to this documentary not knowing a great deal about killer whales. And is that where you started?
I knew nothing.
You know nothing?
Yeah, I remember saying something like, I couldn't spell cetacean. I remember thinking that instead of saying echolocation, I said echolocution. There's just things that, and I thought echolocation was sort of like sonar, like what bats have. Okay, yeah. And I didn't understand that echolocation is actually kind of an ultrasound, essentially, that these, creatures are able to sort of, read kind of what's happening inside you, like they call it seeing with your ears, almost. Okay, yeah. No idea about any of that. No idea. Yeah.
What really surprised you about killer whales in the course of your research, apart from learning those terms?
Right. Yeah. The brain.
Yeah.
Just blew me away. So their brain is, that was revelatory for me, I think, just having that interview with that neuroscientist, Lori Marino. The brain is tremendously large, but we always hear that about primates, highly intelligent, large brain versus body size. But the brain of a killer whale is actually very large, obviously, but then they actually have a part that we don't even have. So they have everything that we have in our brains, but then they have an entire part that we don't have. We can't even identify it because we don't have it. Yeah. We haven't seen it. Yeah. That blew my mind. No pun intended. That totally blew me away.
But you focus in the movie on Tilikum, who is a killer whale who's been involved with several deaths over the years, and the one that drew your attention obviously was Don Brancho, the most recent one. And can you talk about the decision to focus on Tilikum and how you went about doing that?
I knew that for this documentary, I wanted to tell a story. I knew I didn't want it to be just a bunch of facts or I hate SeaWorld incidents, whatever, thrown into this big film. I knew that I just wanted to follow a storyline because, again, I didn't come at the subject matter from sort of an activist position. I just haven't earned those stripes. I didn't know. So what I could do and what I knew that I could do would be what I'm equipped to do, and that's just sort of tell a story. So I knew I wanted to start with Tilikum and going 40 years back, thereabouts, and follow his trajectory along with the trainers. And I don't know, I guess for whatever reason, I just wanted the documentary to not be sort of pedantic and not be necessarily prescriptive, not telling you what you should feel or what you should do or anything like that. I wanted this to feel like a film, and I feel like as a result, you will sit through this because you're watching a story, not because you're sort of being told what to feel. And if you sit through the story, by the end of the 80 minutes, you will have digested a bunch of facts and a bunch of sort of truthful facts.
Yes.
And I just think the medium of storytelling was sort of the way to get at people who might not have cared much about animals, might have taken your kids to SeaWorld like I did, you know, didn't necessarily come to get a dose of medicine. So yeah, so I think that's, you know, Tilikum to me provided, he was the ultimate antagonist.
Yes, indeed.
You know?
Because when I first read about the film, I saw it described as a obviously a documentary, but also a psychological thriller.
Right.
And it is that because the way you position Tilikum, he's like a ticking time bomb. Everything that happens to him in the SeaWorld, in his captivity, just builds and builds and builds and builds until the inevitable, I guess, happens.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that decision to go with that style?
And I almost hate to admit this, but you know, I started out, you know, because my entry point to the film was through the death of Don Brancho. I read the autopsy reports really early on, and I sort of learned about that Don Brancho incident really early on, and it was so terrifying to me. It was just harrowing. So I was actually very scared of Tilikum, and I didn't have a natural empathy. Sadly, I just didn't have this natural empathy for this whale. I knew that there was a reason maybe for what he did or whatever, but I was sort of like too scared. It was like, it's just so easy to sort of demonize, you know, an animal in that situation. So I think when I went back to sort of Sealand and heard about his capture, and, you know, when he was captured from Iceland, we don't depict this in the film, but, you know, he was apparently kept in this like a tank or like a hull of a ship or something for a year. You know, this is essentially a toddler, right? Taken from his family, was kept there with no stimulation and then brought to Sealand of the Pacific. So he was sort of already damaged, you can imagine, maybe psychologically, or at least he was traumatized. So anyway, I had to go back that far to really understand and to sort of feel him as a, you know, a being, and in order to empathize. So I feel like it was almost me needing to do that, as much as you know, part of the storytelling.
Yeah. Did you get to see Tilikum? Did you get to meet him?
I did, and SeaWorld Orlando. He's still there performing, and he came out and did the big splash, and got everybody wet, and then got up on the slide out and did his bow. He is so enormous, and he is this impossible, beautiful bull. You know, he's huge. But after this bow and, you know, whatever, he just sort of does this slow swim, and that's it. I mean, some of the other whales are sort of doing other things. He doesn't seem to be doing anything else. He just does this, like, slow lap around the pool.
Okay.
Yeah. Doesn't look healthy.
Oh, indeed. But going back to the detective story part of filmmaking for you as a documentary maker, like I said, there's an incredible amount of archive footage. You talked about finding the ex-SeaWorld employees. Did they then open gates to finding this footage, or how exactly did you go about getting it?
A lot of it came from them.
Yeah.
It actually came from their personal archives. But yeah, I mean, gosh, I think that OSHA, actually having been in court with SeaWorld.
And OSHA is, sorry.
OSHA, yeah, Occupational Safety and Health Administration? Administration?
Yeah, there we go.
Right, okay, good. They, because of the court case, a lot of sort of exhibits or evidence came to sort of be, you know, public record or almost public record, and I was able to Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, for some of this footage.
Okay. So the footage of Tilikum kind of being captured and being transported to SeaWorld, was that difficult to...
That's archival from Lord knows. I don't even from that. We had so much archival footage from different places, from different times. But no, that did not come from OSHA or from the personal, that came from, I mean, you could find some of this stuff on the internet.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of it you pay for, some of it you have to fair use, but there is footage. I mean, this stuff has really been documented, and a lot of people say, oh, it's so great that you made this film, and I sort of feel like sometimes I just assembled what everybody else has done just in one place. I really don't feel like I did anything beyond that. It existed. These stories existed, and everybody, kind of in this kind of, animal activist role, they know all of this. And so a lot of times you just ask somebody, is there footage of Tilikum and this and that, or is there, footage from the Pen Cove captures, and people just sort of send you to the right places. So
amazing.
Yeah.
In fact, we have some footage of Tilikum now in this second clip, so let's take a look at that. It's a very harrowing and sometimes horrifying documentary. You absolutely don't hold back. There are sequences, not only do we see trainers being dragged under the water by killer whales, there's an astonishing sequence where one trainer actually has to extricate himself from the jaws of a killer whale, but you actually show killer whales attacking other killer whales, and there's a horrible sequence where we see one killer whale being killed. How important was it for you to show this stuff and not to hold back?
And you're speaking about the killer whale.
Yeah, the one that bleeds out.
That bleeds out or whatever. Yeah, he actually wasn't necessarily being killed. He was just sort of those are just rake marks from a whale just putting him into place, kind of. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I didn't. I just couldn't kind of hold back. I think once you just sort of know the truth, your directive is just to tell the truth. I mean, that's, I think that for so long we have just gotten such the polar opposite messaging from these marine parks, that they're happy and that the whales are happy and the trainers are safe and whatever. That's been the message for 40 years.
Yeah.
So I had a chance to sort of tell the truth, and it just, why sort of hold back when you finally are armed with, this footage and these stories. To me, it just felt like my mandate, kind of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And at the end of the film, not to give too much away, but I know there's a subtitle that says SeaWorld repeatedly declined to be interviewed for this film. Right. Did you ever get any feedback from them? Did they try and stop this film in any way? What was the reaction?
No, they didn't. They didn't. They just told me that they were interested in being interviewed, and were really sort of engaging that idea for a while, and then didn't, and then they said they didn't, they declined to be interviewed. Yeah, I mean, I think they didn't stop us. That was really my interaction with them. I did see them at the OSHA trial. I saw them, up on the witness stand, and members from SeaWorld sort of testifying, and from that I kind of got an idea of what it would have been like to interview them. And I realized that I'm not sure that really would have enhanced the film.
Okay.
I think they're so media trained.
Yes.
And they just have this, it's almost an accent. It's really strange. It's so media trained that they can redirect a question just like the best of them, and they can kind of give out a half truth, and they laugh at the right times and try and disarm everybody by kind of like lightening a story. But I don't know. It was just like it was really fascinating. I just don't know. I'm not sure that would have enhanced the film.
Okay.
And I also think, again, they've had 40 years of sort of controlling the message. And then, I have a 80-minute document here that sort of challenges that. And I think to be able to really just tell the truth was so much more important than being, give 5 minutes to SeaWorld and then 5 minutes to the former trainer who doesn't like SeaWorld,
Yeah, sure.
Rather than doing that, I sort of was like, I need to be faithful to the truth and let that be kind of my directive.
Yeah, and again, going on this journey of discovery, did anything really surprise you about SeaWorld practices over the years? I mean, I noticed there's a document in the movie about the number of incidents that perhaps went unreported, where killer whales and trainers might have come together.
Right. Right.
Was that a big surprise? Yeah.
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 I mean, it's like, how much time do you have? You know, like it's really like,
We
yeah,
got
the
plenty of time.
incident.
We got
I know,
enough, yeah.
right? Let's go through every incident. No, you know, there's the two sides that I hoped to represent in the film, and one is, you know, obviously the trainer incidents and kind of what happens to trainers when they're at SeaWorld, and you know, a lot of it is. You know, first of all, these are creatures that I think on a daily basis exercise restraint, and I think the species has to be given credit for just doing that. You know, for being in such a frustrating environment, and just completely just exercising, you know, self-restraint, self-discipline, not attacking, not going at people and exacting every, you know, frustration. And yet there are times when they just do, and they just sort of have had enough, and they teach lessons. This is, you know, all from trainers that have spoken about this. They, you know, if you as a trainer piss a whale off, that whale can wait a week, and you know, to put you in your place a week later, but won't necessarily be frustrated just at everybody, you know?
Okay.
Will be frustrated just at you, and will single you out later.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is, and, you know, again, that I think that trainers would say that the whales teach lessons more than they really, I mean, what Tilikum did was just so horrific and so off the charts compared to sort of what other whales do. I mean, they're very different. What Tilikum did to Dawn was, you can't even, whatever. It's a dismemberment. I mean, it's horrific.
Yeah.
What Kasatka did to Ken Peters, you know, the takedown, was more measured, I guess, you know?
Yeah, that was very
and
much
Ken
a
Peters,
lesson. Yeah.
That's right. And Ken Peters, as a trainer, was up on the witness stand because I saw him in the trial, and he mentioned that he knew, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that she would not kill him. That he was sure the entire time.
Wow.
I mean, you watch that video and you're like, really? Didn't look that sure to me at all.
It's an astonishing sequence. You should really check it out in the movie. But Don Brancho was killed in 2010.
Yeah.
How quickly, Len, did you get the ball rolling on making this documentary, and how long did it take to finish the thing?
Probably the summer of 2010. So
Okay.
a few months later, I just was reading about it in development after it happened, and then started really sort of reaching out to people that summer. So 2010. So it's a year and a half or almost 2 years.
And funding-wise, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience who, you know, are keen filmmakers and maybe even keen documentary filmmakers. And where does the funding come from for something like this? I mean, an independent, precisely, an independent film, independent documentary.
Right.
You didn't go to Kickstarter. You didn't go to crowdsourcing. And
No,
where did they come from?
I wrote a treatment, and I just kind of had that treatment, and started doing some research and started some development, and just took it to somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who had money. It all started with a friend of mine, Rick Brookwell. And he was, you know, a former employer of mine from days, you know, past. But he knew someone who knew someone, and so we were able to get funding from two very generous people who had never made a film before, and I think saw maybe that a documentary would be a bit less than a feature film.
Yes.
And they came aboard. I think they read the treatment and thought, this is actually something that we want to know about as well. And so we kind of embarked on it from then on.
And so in terms of the logistics of making a film like this, are you based in one place? Do you fly around the country going from interview to interview, or how does it work?
You do. So I'm based in Los Angeles, and nobody lived in Los Angeles. So it was flights and trying to consolidate them, and a lot of frequent flyer miles, and you know, a lot of sleeping on floors and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. We have one more clip from the film now. This is a more ominous clip now about a killer whale. There's been an accident involving a killer whale. Let's have a look. So clearly, Gabriela, you'd seen that that tape before you conducted those interviews. But did you sometimes do an interview with someone and then maybe they'd go, well, there's this footage you have to see, and then you had to go back and interview them? How many times did you have to interview people, and did you discover new things along the way?
I interviewed probably everybody once, and then twice for a shorter time. If there was something that I learned during the process, during the year and a half, that I had to sort of come back and get them to weigh in on. But most everything I got the first interview, the first go around. But there's footage like that.
Yeah.
Where I had seen it. It's interesting because you can actually see footage, and I saw that footage, but it's so grainy and happens so fast that you're like, oh, what a bummer. What a mistake. What a terrible mistake. Gosh, how horrible that this set of circumstances just came to be. But wow, that's nobody's fault. Then you just need people to sort of put it into context and contextualize it for you. So when the trainers would comment on that video, I'd be like, oh yeah, that video where he gets, that's terrible. They're like, well, no, he's, we're not sure because we're not in touch with him. But, was a paraplegic at least for a while. That, and people said that, the whale, again, their timing can be perfect.
Yeah.
They just sort of know what they're doing. So every trainer who watches that video, who I've spoken to, say whales do those things when they mean to do those things, and they do those things when they're, this is part of the frustration of captivity.
Absolutely. Did anyone not want to take part that you approached?
Besides SeaWorld?
Yeah, indeed.
I couldn't find a lot of people. I didn't get a lot of calls back from, all the trainers who had accidents, who I tried to get in touch with, I was not able to find them in most cases or hear back from them in most cases. So you can kind of do the math, really, what might have happened between A and B there. Yeah.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Okay. And then we got some time for some questions for Gabriela. If you have anything you want to ask her, please put your hand up. And yes, there's a lot of hands actually. We got a roving microphone going right round. So there's a lady here right in the front row.
Hello.
There we go.
Hi, good evening, Gabriela. First of all, I wanted to thank you very much for having the guts to do this.
Thank you.
For many years, my name's Margot. I'm from the Marine Connection in the UK. And for many years, I worked with Rick O'Barry, and he was very much a song and a voice in the wilderness. But we've now got Jeff and, all the other people that are coming out. But what I wanted to ask you is, did you, because SeaWorld, Blackstone are such a big corporation and they're so slick and they promote this razzmatazz that they don't want people to see behind, did you ever get the feeling that now, because of things like your documentary and books like Death at SeaWorld, did you get the feeling that they now feel there's nowhere to hide, they do have to be a bit more forthcoming? Or do you still think, because they're such a big multinational company, they can just keep giving out the old bullshit that they are? Excuse me, but, did you ever feel that they are feeling slightly threatened by the fact that some of their ex-employees now have the guts to come out and talk to people like you?
I don't know. The film will be released in July, and I think that's when they can really kind of decide whether or not they think it has, any potential to really, get people to not go through those turnstiles. So it's sort of yet to be determined, I think, how they will react. They've issued some statements in the press. I think they were at Sundance, and watched the film very early on. They definitely know we exist. But they've gone public. Their stocks have gone public. So, and one of the risk factors for not having gone public earlier one of them was Blackfish, another was the book Death at SeaWorld, the death of Don Brancheau. These were all sort of risk factors. So they're very aware of us, but I don't know. It's yet to be determined.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And there's some more questions. There's a lady behind you here. If you could just pass the microphone back. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, first of all. I just wanted to ask, how aware were you of people's preconceptions about orca or killer whales when you were making this film, and how did that inform how you went about making it?
I made it from a position of someone who went to SeaWorld. So I knew because I found out that the preconceptions about orcas or about SeaWorld were that, orcas are our friends. They are pretty happy, at SeaWorld. That's how I came into this. I mean, I would go to zoos oftentimes and be sort of depressed by like an orangutan or, and just be like, wow, you can really see the emotion on their faces and that doesn't feel right. And, yet a lot of zoos are, maybe, I don't know much about the behind the scenes or anything like that about zoos, but some of them are kind of there to preserve a species or they're educational. So, I would think, well, SeaWorld, well, that's a really great place. This zoo, not so much. Like SeaWorld, it's happy and clean. And so when I realized it was sort of the opposite, it blew my mind that, having an animal sort of there working for food, for entertainment, is kind of the lowest on the ethical totem pole. I came to that determination much later, I think, about that personal feeling that I have. I came to that much later. So I wanted to go in with the preconceived notion that everybody likes SeaWorld.
What about for people who have preconceptions that orcas are natural-born killers and that's their only incentive? I mean, was it important to you to make to differentiate between the fact that those characteristics come out when they're in captivity specifically?
That's true. I mean, I think it's interesting. I think that people might have known that they're predators and top predators, and they take down great white sharks and do flip the sea lions up. People have seen some of that video, but I think overall, at least I think in the U.S., we're very beholden to sort of SeaWorld's image of happy Shamu, So yeah, I think that the fact that they would have had incidents with people at these marine parks was a huge surprise to people.
And thank you. And talking to preconceptions, there's an amazing clip in the film from the Richard Harris movie Orca, which I think has formed it was basically a Jaws ripoff that came after Jaws. Had you seen that film before?
I remember seeing it as a little kid.
Yeah. So basically
and just being like wrecked by it. Like it was so sad. I mean, actually, one of our trainers, Jeff Ventry, he thinks that the parallel to King Kong and Blackfish is really kind of dead on. Yeah. And I have to agree with that.
Yeah.
So anyway,
indeed. So we've got some more questions now. There's a lady here. Thank you. We'll try and get you guys.
Hi. So my question would be, when you got all of the archive footage and you kind of had to put everything together, did you have a vision? And then when you went to interview all of the ex-trainers, did you have a set of questions, or did you kind of put everything aside and kind of went with the flow?
To answer your first question, I think I always had in mind, the structure of the film and how I wanted to tell the film. And then once I started interviewing, I just punted it. It was all wrong. Which is the beauty of documentary. Like, you have to be comfortable with your filmmaking future being a question mark. So, it's very unstable. But, again, I wanted to kind of come out. I thought I was making a film about human beings and their animal counterparts in the world. There's going to be SeaWorld's going to have a quote, and then the former trainer's going to have a quote. And it's just this big, film, just kind of talking, very philosophical. I don't know what I was thinking, but that is not the film I ended up making. Once you know and find out what people are saying, you sort of are suddenly taken along a route, and you're just keeping up. So that was new for me to sort of seize control.
I was also wondering, when you release the film, when it goes out in cinemas, are you waiting for a specific response from people? And perhaps after making this film and perhaps showing it to your kids, I wanted to know what their reaction was.
Interesting. I don't know what my I don't know the reaction that I want people to have. I think I wanted to tell the story. I guess I want people who ingest that story to have the same feeling that I did, and that is, nothing is what it seems. Don't be a passive consumer. I can say it. I just don't think, after my 2 years of making this film, going from not going from taking my kids to SeaWorld to where I am now, I don't think it's a wise place to spend your money. I hope people don't go. I mean, that's, not at all how I started this movie out, but I do think that there is a place for SeaWorld, given the resources that they have, and the financial resources that they have to be able to do rehab release, to be able to, they could educate. I know they have information that they've gathered, from all these years. They could, and there's cordoning off a cove, and doing soft releases and C-pen releases and all that stuff. So anyway, there's all this stuff that I've learned after having worked on this. But for me, honestly, I just hope people are affected. I call it ethical housekeeping. Like, I just hope this is just one more thing that people kind of can add to their, like, aha, here's how I'm not going to spend my next vacation. Just like have a conversation over a glass of wine with somebody. You don't need to call an 800 number or give money. I just, I set my standards pretty low for that, I think, only because I think people are really smart. And I think that I actually think when you arm them with the truth, they'll make the right decision for themselves and their families. So, yeah.
Sorry, just one last question.
Okay.
I haven't actually seen the film, but it kind of reminds me of The Cove, and I was wondering if there was similarities between the two.
I actually saw The Cove about halfway through making the film, and this speaks to my naivete, but I thought it was about stuff happening in Japan. And then I'm doing this thing about SeaWorld in America and trainers, and, I thought there was, very little overlap, and was blown away by just how much the two have, in common in terms of, I think, what they're trying to do. And Louis Cefollos and Rico Berry are very aware, and they're supportive, and it's, hopefully an amazing partnership in the future. Them.
Fantastic. Thank you. And there's a gentleman right here at the very, very back with the beard. Thank you.
Hi, Gabriela. I saw the film at Sundance. Congratulations, absolutely brilliantly put together.
Thank you.
It gives you, you see them in the wild, you see them in captivity. I think gives everybody an open mind. Like you say, you're not telling people what to think, which I thought was brilliant, the way you did that.
Thank you.
But I'd like to ask you if Dawn Blundell's family in particular, if there's been any contact, if you had to, communicate with them and say, this is what I'm doing, and subsequently, this is what I've done.
Yeah. I did reach out to them. They were the first people I called. I thought that they would be a voice in the movie and kind of the overarching voice in the movie. I think the hardest lesson I had to learn was that, for them was, regurgitating this story, the incident of Dawn, over and over again, which I kind of had to do for the film. That's not necessarily in step with healing as a family. They're committed to that, and they're committed to remembering how great a person Dawn Brencho was. And, the film took a different route. So as much as I've given it to them, given them access to see it, I don't know that all of them have seen it. But I can only just sort of hope that they see that, I can only hope that Dawn would be proud of something like this because of how much she loved the whales. And I think also because I think her sister said to me she would want her coworkers to be safe. So if that's all that I would know, if their family was okay with that, I think I'd be satisfied. Yeah, it's a tough one though.
Thanks very much. Anyone with a last question? Yes, please, sir. And this is the last one. Thank you.
What are you going to do next? Are you going to carry on making marine documentaries, or are you going to go for something totally different?
I don't know. I have an idea I'm working on, and it's always percolating. Like as a documentary filmmaker, you always have doing something up there in the soup. So I hope to have something out in the future. But yes, I'm still making films.
And do you have any advice to impart to young filmmakers who might want to follow in your footsteps? What should they do? How should they go about it? $64,000.
Yes. No, it's a great question. I think I can only really speak to documentary filmmaking. So I would say that I think I spoke to a great filmmaker about this, and she was also a documentary filmmaker. But I think like a film seems like this sort of gestalt, like big, huge, oh my God, you made a film. And it always seems like it's more than the sum of its parts,
Yeah.
but it's really just the parts. So it's really just getting up every morning and doing an interview and spending a little money on insurance as possible, and getting on a plane with your frequent flyer miles, with your gear, and doing that interview. So if you just remember that if you just keep working at the parts and getting up like it's your 9 to 5, don't spend time in the cafe, thinking and dreaming. Just blue collar it. You know what I mean? Like just get up and do it, and just
borrow
part
equipment,
by
do whatever.
part by part.
Yeah.
Right. You will have a film. And then when you have a film, I don't care how good it is, I don't care how short it is, it doesn't matter. You're now a filmmaker. So get there. Little blood, sweat, and tears doesn't hurt, but get there. So I think that's
a lovely note in which to end. Actually, thanks so much for coming. Blackfish, of course, is out on July 26th. Thanks for your questions. Thanks most of all to Gabriela Cowperthwaite. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And how did you find this story for this? What was your inspiration to make this documentary?
It's hard to say that this is inspiration, because it feels sort of terrible to say that, but it was the death of Don Brancho was kind of confounded me, terrified me, and it just, I think, sort of gave me the gigantic question that I sort of had to answer, and that is, why did a top SeaWorld trainer come to be killed by a killer whale?
But still, when you have that question in your head, to actually go ahead and then start making a documentary, how difficult was that? Because you have to draw upon a lot of materials. There's a lot of archive footage in the film, which is often horrifying. How did you go about doing that? Was it a bit of detective work on your part, finding these hidden tapes and talking to people?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to stumble upon an article called Killer in the Pool by Tim Zimmerman. He wrote for Outside Magazine.
Yes.
That was just, to me, a pretty incredible...
Please welcome the director of Blackfish, Gabriela Cowperthwaite. Hello.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Gabriela, welcome. Now, for the
Thanks
people,
for having me.
Oh, indeed. Well, we've obviously seen the trailer, but can you put into context for people what is Blackfish?
Blackfish is the name that the First Nations peoples, the Native Americans, the Pacific Northwest, used to call them. Old-time fishermen used to call them that as well. So,
Okay.
Yeah, they were never meant to be. It's sort of the lore behind that name is that they were never meant to be captured, and they were never meant to be harmed.
Okay. Was that always a title when you embarked upon this project? Or did it come
I
up?
started reading a book called A Whale Called Killer, and it featured some, old, timey kind of fisherman types, and they said, "Hey, we see a pot of blackfish in the distance," and at that moment, I was like, "That's my title."
Fair enough.
Incredible. It had information in there that I had never. I didn't know existed. I didn't know that they were captured, where they were captured from. I sort of didn't know how whales got into these marine parks in the first place. So I think from that moment, I sort of had, I contacted him, spoke to him a bit, and we started kind of going, I started contacting some of his resources from that. And sort of, I think the moment that I knew it could be a film was when I sort of found out that there were former SeaWorld trainers who were willing to talk. That's when I knew I had a film, because I knew I needed apostles, is what I call them.
Yes.
Messengers from the other side.
Indeed.
To be able to sort of deliver the message.
Okay.
Right.
And we actually have a clip. We have a few clips from the film, and the first one actually features a few of those ex-trainers. Let's take a look at the clip. It's a fascinating clip because you talked about apostles, and the film comes down, I'd say, fairly strongly on the side of anti-captivity. And but at the same time, that gentleman there, the last ex-trainer, believes that killer whales.
Moment, I kind of wanted them to follow their trajectory for the storyline. So I had to start at the top, and start with the dream, and start with some of the sort of maybe more positive. A positive sort of lives that they envisioned having.
Yeah.
when they started working there. And then, I guess, sort of peel back the onion from that moment on.
And did you, in terms of your research, did you actually, at any point, have first-hand experience of killer whales? I mean, there are scenes of them in the wild, there are scenes of them in captivity at SeaWorld and other places. Did you actually go and experience it yourself?
I did go to SeaWorld, and we filmed a bit there, and then and I saw them in the wild. So I saw both. Yeah. You know, and having been to SeaWorld before, I obviously had that experience. But yeah, from quite a different lens after embarking on working on the film.
I can imagine. What's that experience like when you see them up close, especially in the wild?
Oh my gosh, they are they're enormous.
Should or can be kept in captivity with relatively little consequences if they're treated correctly. Was it important for you to have balance as well in the people you spoke to for this?
Yeah, you know, I think with that clip in particular, I thought I knew I had to start the movie from this sort of bright-eyed vision and notion of SeaWorld that we all have growing up as kids, and you know, the lovable, you know, Shamu icon. Yeah. And this also kind of burning desire. You know, I don't come from any animal activism. Yes. I'm sort of a mother who took her kids to SeaWorld. I'm a documentary filmmaker, but I mean, I took my kids to SeaWorld in San Diego. And so I needed to start the film there with the idea that SeaWorld is this, you know, on every parent's bucket list of, you know, where you take your kids. And, and there's a reason for that, you know? And so I kind of wanted to start up here with the dream that the trainers had, you know, because for a lot of them it was a lifelong dream to sort of train killer whales. And that from that moment,